Still not 100% happy where I have this mic positioned. And this is when I figure out that the key got revoked today and I gotta spend another 2 minutes. Nah, it's fine. Oh, this is all about using the range, man. Because up close fighting just feels like it's a reaction time contest for the most part. Anyway, it's like, ugh. Like, it feels like everyone kind of knows what to do for G-Forces. This is a matter of who's doing their moves faster. It's like, yeah, that's kind of what I feel. Because I think accuracy is actually coming more into play from further away. In general. Yeah, so this is like kind of more the range I think I want to be at. I think so. Being mad at Halo all the time. Yeah, I'm really hoping that they never really fix Halo Infinite just so that game can die out. Because I'll be really happy. Because then we can get games either more similar to Halo 5 or the older ones, which are way better anyway. Although, I do find it very disturbing how the people that thought the game was only, you know, minorly very... Yeah, like, they just thought it was fine. Like, they had no mention of the actual, like, Spartan dialogue and the AI dialogue, which is, like, the most annoying thing in the game. But they did mention, specifically in reference to Halo 4, how they don't like how Master Chief is, like, way more talkative. It's like... Okay, I do find it a little strange how you'd have a problem with Master Chief talking more, because he already was, like... In Halo 1, he has a decent amount of lines. So I'd find it weird that you'd have a problem with him talking more, but not have a problem with the Spartans in the multiplayer just, like, being fucking assholes or annoying all the fucking time. Too close. Yeah, so it is quite spooky. Just being more longer range ode. But that was like one thing that came up. Oh, there was some criticism of Halo 4 that came up that I would say I probably agree with, which is like they did make the story just more generic. In that you like run into like the big bad alien who like kicks your ass, and then Master Chief ends up being like the chosen one, and everything was all rigged from the start. It's like, yeah. It's like, but I do find it strange how, as well, how I know they've gone on record for saying that they only care about the execution, not necessarily what the initial idea was. So I do find it a little strange how they're criticizing the actual idea that they did in Halo 4, even though it was cliched, versus the execution of it, which I think was done fine. Even though the execution's like, it's a little... It's just a little unbelievable, I would say, Halo 4. How they want you to believe that, like, yes, this whole time the Forerunners pre-planned every event in the Halo universe that would happen in this current time. It's like, I don't believe you. I don't believe they did that. I don't think there's anything else that's going on, though, that they said about Halo. Oh, apart from they, like, conveniently, like, took too long to mention a lack of, like, infection and whatnot. So it's like, yeah. Oh no, I kind of get the feeling that as they're gonna talk about Halo Infinite, because only listen to them for an hour when it's like a 5-hour strom, that the game will just, like, decay as they talk more about it. I mean, I think the main thing I'm confused about is they mention, like, several things, like the weapons not being as good and stuff like that, but they still mention the multiplayer as being, like, pretty good. I'm like, why? Because you said the weapons aren't, like, as good as the other games. And I think you mentioned issues you have with some of the maps at some point. I don't think they mention anything about RNG weapon spawns, which is, like, horrific. That's probably, like, one of the dumbest things about Halo Infinite, is the randomized weapon spawns and randomized vehicle spawns. I just find it weird out. It's like, you haven't said anything very favorable about the game other than it's good, but there's no evidence that you're saying that, like, explains why it's good. I think the best we got is... The best I got out of him is, like, the assault rifle and the pistol work really well together. So I think that's what it is. It's like, oh, because you start with, like, solid weapons that have good killing power. It's like... That's what makes it fun, because those two are, like, pretty decently skilled weapons to use, where you gotta be accurate with them. Something like that. Oh, and I like how it's like... There's like the argument in TDM about like what's better, which is either attacking the strongest or culling the weakest. I think culling the weakest is best. Because that way you're just going to outpace them on kill, because that's the whole point of attrition, is to get more kills than them. So if you're culling the weakest all the time, you're just farming him out for kills. Because if he's the weakest, he should be the easiest player to kill. So it shouldn't be hard at all to just kill him really quickly if you're all focused on him. So you can just keep doing that, and you could just kill them faster than they're going to kill you if they're engaging your strongest player. It's like, the strongest player should be living longer than the weakest player. And if that's not happening, then the strongest player isn't actually as good as you think he is. Or something like that. So I think culling weakest is the best for attrition. If you actually want to, like, get the most points. Because, like, especially if both of you are engaging the strongest, you really slog down the frickin' game a lot. If both of you are just, like, constantly going after the strongest players. And ignoring the weak players. And, plus, it makes sure that the weak players stay weak, because they never get challenged at all. They're just perpetually trying to help you out with engaging someone and putting extra damage on them, but they're never taking any fire themselves. And engaging someone to help them out is also can be very frustrating as well. So, I mean, sometimes it's not always, like, the best experience to have, like, the weaker members of your team perpetually trying to help you. And they can't, like, help you out very well. And so that gets them frustrated, because they don't have to deal with, like, any attacking pressure at all. It's all on you. So there's nothing they can actually do other than to shoot at them for supporting. I mean, you could try to use the repair tool, but, like, the repair tool is deliberately designed so that it's easier to shoot the enemy with, like, any gun. And not only is it easier, you'll also be doing more damage than you would in terms of healing back up, regardless, so. At least in terms of, like, mid-combat length. So I don't think using a repair gun would help that. So if you're, like, stuck helping support a guy, I think you just need to put the easiest gun you can for supporting and then just hope for the best. I think that's, like, if you're stuck in this scenario where you know you're not as good at the game as, like, some other people on your team, and the enemy team just want to focus the strongest guy all the time, so you're never getting any pressure on you. I think at that point, you just want to use the gun you know you're the most confident in with attacking people, and then just, like, hope for the best at that point. Just, like, try as hard as you can just to, like, do damage. Because you're probably not going to get attacked if they're focused on engaging the strongest person to prevent him from, like, getting lots of kills. Because I think that's the main thing. It's like, I think it was like I don't know, it was last Sunday. I think, like, in most cases where I was getting, like, 2v1 or 3v1 or whatever, like, generally, like, all the time it was 2 or more players attacking, I was still having either a slightly higher KD than 1, or just 1 KD, and I think only in one instance did I have, like, a negative KD. Because I think I realized what was going on, so I was just trying to, like, more aggressively just attack, just to get kills out. Because I just decided that I was basically living on borrowed time, no matter what I would do. So I was trying to just be whoever I would pick to attack, just trying to aggressively do any damage at all on them before I would die, just to ensure that I'm not, like, contributing negatively to the team at a minimum, just because I'm going to constantly deal with so much aggro. Because from all I was, like, hearing from my team, they were just having issues, like, being able to support me, just because it's surprisingly hard to, like, deal with people third-partying if they're, like, dodging all over the place all the time. It's surprisingly hard to actually, like, put extra damage on them. And the only way you're going to reliably do it is if you're doing giant sweeping passes. If you want to actually, like, get close to them and brawl them as, like, a third person in the fight, it's surprisingly hard. And probably the main reason it's surprisingly hard, it's probably has to do with the G-force, like, asymmetry. That's, I mean, to me, it's like anything feeling hard in HunterNet is, I blame on the asymmetrical G-forces when they used to be more symmetrical to, like, any difficulty, because it just means that every now and then you're either forced to rotate and then use your up vector, or you're forced to have to go down, but because you can't go down very long, you're forced to not have to go down or you're gonna G-lock yourself. So that small, like, latency causes you to, like, lose people when you just got them. Because that's, like, the main thing I do all the time, is I exhaust my G-forces to get close to somebody. I'm forced to, like, do a maneuver I don't want to do to recover Gs, and in that time, all the work that I put in to get close to somebody, I'll lose, and the positioning will get, like, reset to, like, the start of the frickin' fight. And that's what will happen all the time to me. Even though I'm not the best at managing the Gs, it's just, like, yeah, it really feels like that happens more often than it used to. Where you, like, do everything you can to get on a good position, and then you just lose it. It's like, yeah, it's slightly obnoxious. I'm having fun practicing more, like, mid-rangey combat, because, like, yeah, I've just been trying to be aggressive in general for the last 2 weeks, and I was getting so fed up with it to the point where I think it was making me feel ill from doing it. Because it's not something I typically enjoy, but I was getting so fed up of doing that type of gameplay that I'm not very good at, that I was not feeling good, so it's like, okay, we're done then. We're gonna play more normally, how I more normally want to play, instead of trying to commit to something that I'm not as good at. Just because it's not making me feel well. Like, it was essentially getting to the point where I was getting less frustrated from racing, when I'm not the hugest fan of racing. I just happen to luck into doing fast laps every now and then. But I was getting to the point where racing was becoming less frustrating than the actual combat, just because I was forcing myself to be aggressive more. So that's how it's like, I know, it's like, okay, I should go back to playing more passively, like how I want to. Even if it's not gonna quite be as good as it used to, just from all the gameplay changes. It's like, it's just becoming a matter of, okay, what's actually enjoyable for me? It's like, I could try to learn, like, the more better way to play the game based on how it's designed. Or I can do something that's not quite as effective, but I enjoy it more. So decided it's like, I'm just gonna do what I find more enjoyable. Or just to be more passive. Even though the recent changes make being aggressive better, and I'm convinced that, like, it's gonna slowly get tipped more and more and more into that direction. Especially if people are still able to be passive and when it gets people being aggressive, I'm really convinced that passive gameplay will just keep getting nerfed and nerfed and nerfed until aggressive gameplay is just winning out, according to the people who like playing really aggressively, at least. That's, like, kind of what I'm convinced will happen. Just, like, you know, creep. Like, aggressive creep. It's like, it's just gonna keep going on. Because I know it's the main reason the G-forces were changed to be asymmetrical was to encourage, like, being aggressive, because you got, like, oh, you gotta, like, constantly, like, manage your rotation better and make sure you're always going up, except if you're always going up and I'm gonna almost G-Luck going up, I have to either switch to going left or right or down. I don't have a choice anymore. If I've been going up for 5 seconds and my position isn't any better, I have to change what direction I'm moving in. I don't really have a choice in that matter. Like, I'm not the best at managing D-forces, but I know that much where it's like, you can't just keep going up. It's like, if going up doesn't work for 5 seconds and you're not in any better of a spot than you were before, you gotta change it up. And then when you change it up, that's when you're either gonna get hit or you're gonna, like, hit them. And that's where I think the reaction time's coming into play. Because both of you feel like you're changing your directions at a similar time. So when you're this close, it's just a reaction time. It's like, who's gonna react to who's, like, changing faster? And whoever does that, that's who's gonna put out damage and who isn't gonna put out damage. It's like, it's just a, who's gonna react faster? And whoever reacts faster, that's the guy who's gonna put out damage, and the guy who reacts slower might miss a shot because he didn't react with his mouse movement or joystick movement fast enough. Which means you're giving mice an inherent advantage up close by making it reaction speed, like, slightly more reaction speed heavy. But it's just what I don't like about the asymmetrical, is essentially it's like, well, going up is just perpetually meta, essentially. Anytime you are going a direction that's not up, you're playing against the meta for up-close movement, essentially. So while you have it being 6 degrees of freedom, you're inherently making some axes better than others. So you're, like, making the actual flying feel more repetitive. And that's where it gets more into, oh, it's less about having a lot of options and doing what you want. It's more about there's a right way to fly, and you just get better at, you're just refining the right way to move more. So that's just why I don't like the asymmetrical Gs, and why I kind of just blame them for everything. Because I genuinely think that they are the reason why I don't enjoy the game quite as much as I used to, like a year ago, when the Gs were perfectly symmetrical on the strafing, and the only difference was forward was slightly more generous than reversing, but I think, like, ever since reverse Gs got nerfed, so, like, back strafing, I think ever since back strafing got nerfed, it's like, that was, like, the beginning of, like, changes that I don't like for the game. Because I think my list of, like, changes is, like, it started with, like, back strafing getting nerfed, then it was asymmetrical Gs, to where the up is the most generous, and then going down is in reverse the least generous now. And then, I think having ammo and energy weapons be separate off, that was, like, the latest change that I just don't like. I still don't like it. I think it's a little tismy. I still think that, like, I think ammo at all should just be something reserved for the second faction completely. And the current faction shouldn't even have ammo whatsoever. Like, every weapon should just be, like, pulling from the energy, and that's, like, how the faction's ships are just designed to run. Like, even a kinetic weapon, it's using the energy of your ship to make the shell or something. That's just technology that they invested into. And that's why their ships aren't as durable or, like, high-performing as, like, the other faction. It's because they deliberately designed the ships to be sustainable instead of being, like, combat effective. And that's why with the Earth Alliances, their ships are more combat effective, but they're nowhere near as sustainable, and they run out of resources, and that's a genuine risk that you have to deal with. They also, I believe, for the asymmetrical G-forces, I think that would work better in the second faction, too. And I think this faction works better with symmetrical Gs. It's also more, you know, new player friendly, I think. Because it just gives you more options for flying. It's like, you don't have to be worried about managing your roll and your up movement so much. You just have to make sure you're, like, putting actions into it. Because both of them are APM heavy. It's just one with the symmetrical Gs. Any actions at all are going to help you. In most cases, every now and then it's better to, like, do nothing. Just to recover Gs, at least. But under both systems, it's like asymmetrical Gs, I feel like you're encouraging a very specific series of movements. Whereas with symmetrical Gs, it's like you're not encouraging any particular movement. It's just up to whatever the pilot wants to do. Which is kind of like why I think I like arcade games more. Because arcade games, it's like there is no meta movement. It's just whatever you want to do. And usually the meta will just end up being 80 spam or something, but... Not always. Like, if they actually tone the accelerations correctly, the spamming A&D might not actually be the best way to move in terms of just dodging fire. And if it's a game with slow projectiles, spamming A&D will, like, throw off your projectiles so much that it won't feel very worth it to do, except in very specific circumstances. Just kind of like how I want, like, spamming just, like, microstrafes to work. It's like... It is not the meta way to play, but it does every now and then have, like, a purpose. And, like, some people will get really horrifically fooled by microstrafing, like me. Like, if someone's just spamming microstrafing, I can't hit them to save my life, and that's how it is. That's why I like frame rate, though, because the more frame rate I have, the less good microstrafe spam is, because the better idea I have on, like, what their ship's doing at that point. And I won't, like, overlead as much the more frame rate I have. Because I can just get a better idea of what their ship's doing. So that's why I want as much frames as I can get. That's why it's like, I wish I could lock my game to 240 Hz. I just don't have the graphics card to do that. Intensity just isn't quite good enough, even with me optimizing the rendering settings. It's just not quite good enough to force 240 Hz. To force 240 Hz in games not specifically, like, made to run in that frame rate, you just have to brute force it and hope for the best. Because even if you're brute forcing it, a lot of games just won't even, like, go up, because they'll be CPU bottlenecked instead of graphics card bottlenecked. Because at least, like, of HunterNet, it's like, it is definitely bottlenecked by my graphics card, and even then, it's not really bottlenecked. It's more just bound by my graphics card, because bottleneck usually implies that, like, oh, there's, like, a really harsh performance limitation. It's like, it's not a harsh limit, it's just, like, increasing my graphics card is what's gonna increase my performance, but I'm bottlenecked to, like, 160 Hz. Like, that's not what I would consider a bottleneck by any stretch of the imagination. Because I'm sure that, like, if I improved my CPU, I would probably get a tiny frame rate benefit anyway. Because I'm not, like, strictly just only limited by the graphics cards. Like, I'm sure I'd get tiny performances. It's just that the most efficient way to get more frames is, like, a better GPU. Which is why I'm either waiting for one to get reasonably priced or just for the next, like, lineup of graphics cards to come out. Because those would give me an even bigger, like, performance headroom to where I don't... To where if, like, 360 Hz becomes popular or 480 Hz becomes popular, if I got next year's graphics cards, I would probably have no problem staying at that high of a frame rate, even for games that don't, like, aren't particularly designed to run at that high of a frame rate. Although, I think for HunterNet, I think because of the slow rotation speed, I think... it's probably capped out the 500 Hz for, like, any noticeable benefit you'll see. And due to, like, the movement speed, too, it's, like... I think once you hit, like, 500 Hz in, like, you know, the next, like, 5 years is probably when 500 Hz would be. I said give it 5 years and 500 Hz might become a thing that's, like, done. I mean, 480 Hz is probably, like, where it would start, though, but I'm sure, like, 500 Hz would be, like... You'd probably be able to overclock a 480 Hz monitor to 500 Hz, and they'd probably advertise that, but... I think, like, 500 Hz, like, that's probably the upper, like, ceiling on frame rate for HunterNet specifically, just because, like, the movements are slow enough and the rotation speed is slow enough that having a higher rate than 500 Hz, it's like, the pixels on your screen just aren't moving fast enough for you to see any more detail with a higher frame rate than 500. And the only time you'll see more detail is if somebody's moving, like, at 1,000 meters a second. across your screen perfectly, that's probably like the only time you'll get a benefit out of a higher frame rate other than the latency reduction that you're always going to get with a higher frame rate. Oh, a heavy crash into me and it killed him. That's pretty beneficial to it. But yeah, I'm still going to continue to blame the frickin' asymmetrical Gs for like every frickin' problem, because I do genuinely think they are the main culprit of any frustrations people run into. It's like, especially when it comes to like third-partying people, it's like, and why you feel like you have to like swing out really, really far and do a pass on them. And then, because now it's like, oh, I have a good chance to get hits, and then I'm here, so it's beneficial to go away and then converge on them. Why that feels better is because, well, if you want to brawl them up close, you have to be using your up vector as much as possible, because that's the most you're allowed to move in. And I think part of the philosophy in having asymmetrical G-forces is you nerf dicording and tricording a little bit. I mean, yeah, you kind of make it a little bit less, like, powerful, but it's still gonna be better. Like, if I'm going up and then slightly to the right, that's still gonna move my ship more than if I just only went up. Like, it's still going to help. It just makes pulling off tricording a lot harder, because you're gonna have to stop pressing your left-right movement before your up movement. If you're going up, is like you're gonna have to time like switching your directions completely differently, because you're limited by the G-forces, versus like if it was more symmetrical, it's like, oh, just being able to time when to change directions, it would feel a lot easier, because you know that between your up, down, left, and right, if you press up and left at the same time, you know you'll need to switch to going right and down if you want to do a perfect inverted strafe. You know you'll do that at the exact same time. Versus right now, if I'm going up and to the right, I'll have to not move right before I can start moving up more. That's I know that's like what will have to happen. So if I just test it now. Yeah. See, I actually fumbled it. I let go of spacebar before letting go of the right. Just because I'm not used to concentrating on doing a very specific thing like that. When we're pulling Gs. Yeah, so if I let go of the right arrow, I will cover a small amount of Gs, because I'm no longer pushing the right vector, which will exhaust sooner. So that's why it's like, that's what makes tricording feel a little stranger than it used to. Because you need to let go of any direction that's not up sooner than letting go of up, versus the old way where you could let go of the same keys at the same time. If you just started moving, and if you just started going diagonally, it's like, you know, you let go of both keys at the exact same time. And that's like the best way. You already know that's like, okay, I've like maximized moving in that direction. Because that's what I decided to do in that fight. It's like, I wanted to go as far this direction as I could before passing out, and then change the direction. That's like what I committed to. Because that's what I think will like help my position. It's like, well, it's like, you know that it's like, oh, the timing on that's really easy. But if you want to go diagonally with an asymmetrical G-force, it's a lot harder to know how far you can push it to then let go of going on your right strafe, and then how much more you can then continue on your up strafe, and then you need to change direction on your up strafe, and you would have already changed direction on your right strafe to either going left or just like deciding to like push forwards more, just whatever you decide to do. So it's just harder to keep track of your G-force budget with the asymmetrical one, because the only feedback you're getting from your G-forces is just either blacking out or redding out. So knowing how much of your blackout is coming from going right and going up is a lot harder to like glean from. Just because it's asymmetrical. Versus it being symmetrical, it's like, yeah, you have the same feedback from your screen blacking out. But because the contribution is equal to both directions, you know, like, exactly how much you can push it way more intuitively. So you feel like you're gonna master that, like, you know, system a lot easier. It also makes the roll less important, even though the roll's still important, because roll allows you to, like, curve your movement, even under a symmetrical system. It allows you to move in curves, and if you're rolling and going diagonally, you're going to end up moving farther in most cases, and if you just only went diagonally, it's like you're... Like, the line you'll travel in, because you're going to travel in a curved line doing that, will be longer than the diagonal that you would do if you didn't rotate during that, like, just going diagonal. So it's like, it's converted. So it's like rolling allows you to move a greater distance, but you end up closer to your original position, versus going purely diagonal is you get a lot farther from your starting position, but the total amount you're able to move doing that one movement is lower. So that's why they both have a purpose. One's better at actually, like, positioning, and one's better at, like, causing your opponent to work a lot harder to, like, keep you on target. So there's a genuine reason to pick between, like, what you want to do, even with, like, a symmetrical system. It's like picking between just only going diagonal or going diagonal and rolling. They both have, like, a usage, even under symmetrical. Because that's the main reason you make it asymmetrical. It's like, oh, you want people to, like, you know, roll fight more. You want people to constantly be rolling to, like, make sure they're facing the more optimal vector so that they can maneuver longer without passing out. Because that's typically what you want to do, and that's why you do it, but I just don't like it. So I think the symmetrical system has more nuance to it than an asymmetrical one, because an asymmetrical one's like, oh, what am I gonna do? Go up. Because, like, there's no point going down other than if I have to. Or to, like, temporarily depress the G so I can spend even more time going up. It also makes it way easier to hit people, because you know 9 times out of 10 they're probably just gonna go up. So you already know where to aim. To, like, if you just guess to aim above somebody because you think they'll go up, it's like you're gonna be right more often than not, just because that's the best direction to move in. Versus if it's symmetrical, it's like you have no idea what direction they're gonna move in, because there's no particular direction's better than the other, just from a distance standpoint. The only reason a direction would be better is if the guy you're fighting figures out that if he moves in that direction, he'll get a better position on you. So if he's already below you, if he continues to go down, he'll still continue to outmaneuver, versus if he decides to suddenly go up, that's a bad idea, because he's gonna maneuver into his target's field of view better, because he's already below him. So that's like... So your movement is based entirely on positioning, and there's no consideration of what direction's the most optimal, unless you've already pulled G. So it's like, assuming you're at, like, 0 G exhaustion, no direction is inherently better than the other unless you already know that it will improve your position. Versus asymmetrical, where one direction is always going to be the best option if you're only looking at a distance standpoint. Like, oh, what direction is going to allow me to move the furthest? It's like, well, up. It's always up. And under symmetrical, what direction's the best? It's like, well, if you just want to go as far as possible, really, dicording or tricording is the answer at that point. But if you're just going to talk about I only want to move in one direction only, it's like, well, you can pick whichever one you want. Doesn't matter. It's like you can go up, down, left, right, doesn't fucking matter. It's just up to you. It's your choice completely. If your goal is just to move as far as you can using only one key. It's like, you can pick. Because even under the asymmetrical systems, like, yeah, going up's always the best though. But if you really care about maximizing your distance in one maneuver, tricording is still going to be the best. Although, and I'm not, like, sure. I think, like, the way the G-forces work is they're all calculated, so it's very possible that because of the calculation handling on it, that tricording might technically move you less distance in one G-load, simply because the up vector is more tolerant. So I just don't know in depth each, but it's very possible that if you just commit to only going up, and you don't do any dicording or tricording, that the total distance you move might be greater. just because the up vector is always calculated to have be the most generous, besides the forward one, obviously. So if you only go up, the total distance you might move might be greater than if you go up and to the right, because you're half going right and half going up. It's probably going to calculate the tolerance to be in between the right vector and the up vector. It might do that. I don't know enough in detail if that's what's going on. But if that is, then it's like, well, that means that, like, literally just only going up, if you only care about maximizing the distance you're going to pull on somebody, that's actually better. If that's the case. I just don't know if that's the case at all. And I don't really care to find out, just because it's like, I don't even want to fly that like that. It's like, I want to fight from mid-range, and mid-range you don't have to be so worried about gaining distance. You're just worried about getting an easy shot on somebody and evading their fire, and that's all you're really worried about. Because positioning, it's like, the positioning, it's like, the only way you're going to get behind someone if you're at a far distance is if they close into you in a boneheaded way where you can easily counter it. It's like, that's the only time positioning is going to matter. Otherwise, you're just worried about getting an easy shot and evading their fire. That's all your worry is at mid-range. So it's a lot easier, I think, to play at mid-range than to play up close. Because up close, it's like, okay, well, now you have to actually be, like, really good at managing your G-forces, because that's what's going to limit your ability to do everything. And you need to be very fast at reacting to changes, because if someone changes direction, the amount their ship's going to move on your screen is, like, way, way higher and harder to keep up with than if they were further away. Because the further away you are, the less they appear to move. Which also means it's like the more helpful your rotation is as well. So like if someone moves like at 500 meters away, it's really easy for me to just rotate and then counter it. But if I'm like 100 meters away and they move, my rotation speed might not even be fast enough to possibly keep up with them. And it might be impossible for me to even hit them if they decide to go up. But that's why reaction time plays into it, because if they decide to go from going right to up, and you notice that being able to react really, really quickly to that might be the difference between you being able to get a hit on someone and missing them, and having it be impossible to hit them no matter what maneuvering you do until they G-lock themselves or just exhaust their G-pull with that maneuver. So that's why I don't like up-close fighting. It's like, it's really complicated and just hard to deal with. And it's very mechanical skill heavy, like. That's why I think the Pip is probably I think the Pip is the best up close, just because it helps with the reaction time. Because if you see the Pip changing directions, you already know what direction they're moving in. So that helps you react to what they do faster, so that helps you get a big advantage on people at close range using the Pip. Whereas I think with, like, no Pips, it's like, it helps you, like, predict people a little bit better. But the consequences, while you might be able to predict people better, it's going to take longer for you to figure out what they're doing, generally. Because you're interpreting where they're going based on their movement on your screen. Or you're going by your tracers. That's like the two ways you're dealing with it. So that's just going to take you longer to figure out. Until you have, like, muscle memory for a lot of basic, like, movements that you'll notice that people do. Or, in this case, like what AI do. Like, the AI, it's like, yeah, even with no Pips, it's like, it'll be pretty easy to hit the AI a lot, just because the AI have, like, a much more limited set of movement. So you'll probably get muscle memory for those, at least. Which will help you out. And then this also, like, I think the asymmetrical Gs, this also makes the bomber and heavies, like, in a strange spot where it's, like, technically, because the G-forces kind of normalize the movement out, the only advantage the light has in outmaneuvering is the rotation speed. Because in terms of its movement, it can't move any further total distance than the bomber or heavy can. Because the G-forces are the same between every fighter. So the total, like, distance you're able to move in, no matter what fighter you're playing as, is always going to be the same. The only difference is the rotation speed, which does help. But in terms of positioning, the rotation speed doesn't really help you. But in terms of being on target, the rotation speed is going to absolutely help you. So in reality, it's like the light isn't any better at getting behind the bomber than the bomber is at getting behind a bomber. The only difference is the light can, like, move in the same distance faster, but every fighter moves in the same distance based on the Gs. It's just the lighter the fighter, the faster it can move in that distance. But because the whole distance is already the same, in theory, if you were really skilled, it wouldn't matter what fighter you would pick in terms of a positioning standpoint, and the only benefit you'd get is, like, the rotation speed bonus from a smaller fighter, which will help you just, like, stay on target more and whatnot. Oh, no. I got a spam chat message. I gotta go ban it. There we go. Whoa, got rid of that. I say, at least the spam, like, bot messages have gone down. Like, I've been happy about that. So I think Twitch was actually putting some legwork to getting rid of some of the bot accounts. Even though there's kind of a conflict of interest for Twitch to get rid of bot accounts, because they technically earn money from bot views. Just because their revenue is mostly, like, Twitch itself, I think, is mostly ad-based. And I think they get a cut from subs, but I think most of the revenue is coming from ads. So, and the way you make money from ads, it's just like, well, whatever the fucking, like, deal you're getting from the advertisers. And the more views you have, the better, the more advertisers are willing to pay you, the more views you can generate. So, Twitch is, like, constantly motivated just to get, like, as many views as it can, even if some of them are gonna be bots. Because there's no easy way for them to figure out how many of those weren't actually real people without, like, putting a lot of effort into, like, having, like, really good bot detection and then enforcing it. It's like, you're just gonna kind of get paid for bot views as well from Twitch's standpoint. So that's why they're kind of, I don't feel like they're working as hard as they can to solve any bot problems, because they're kind of earning money from bot accounts that do exist, that just watch people for, like, long periods of time. Because they're just counted as a human viewer that would have watched an ad, which is then used to negotiate actual advertising, you know, contracts of advertisers, even though I'm pretty sure there's really not a lot of negotiating happening. It's probably more like Facebook and Google, where an advertiser just sets a automatic price for an ad, and whenever that bid ends up being, like, the highest for that particular time, it will just show that ad. So it's entirely an automated negotiating system, because it's just based off pure supply and demand at that point. And that's why Facebook and Google, like, have, like, such a good, like, advertising, like, revenue stream. It's because they fully automated it, where advertisers don't really have to, like, talk to anyone to, like, advertise something. It's like they just set the price that they're willing to pay to advertise, and anytime that they're the highest price compared to everyone else for that time slot, their ad will display. So it's basically, they're setting a budget for the automated system to automatically bid on time slots, and then all the ones that they win the bidding on is when their ad will get shown over everyone else's ad. That's like this oversimplified version, because there's also other factors, like, okay, well, they also have a targeted audience that they've set as well. So if no one else's ads are considered a good fit, but theirs is, they'll be able to get that advertising slot a lot cheaper, because no one else is gonna, like, really... The automated system knows to not bother bidding that slot, because it's just gonna score it as, like, a low advertising value. Because there's a few behaviors you can set for, like, automated Google ads. Like, you can set, just always go for the cheapest, like, slot possible. You can set it to try and just, like, go for the most, like, views. Like, don't be so worried about the target audience. Just try to outbid everyone going for the time slot that has the most, like, you know, viewership pool. and then you have it to bid for like targeting your target audiences. Like, try to outbid anyone in the most optimal time slot based on the target audience I set, based on like age group and like their past, like, you know, history online, because, you know, everything collects data on you. So, you know, a lot of ads, it's like they're gonna try and advertise to you if they think you're a good fit for that ad, as in you're likely to buy it. And it's typically based on your Google search history. That's like the main thing that's gonna influence your ad selection. It's just what you Google is probably the main thing. And then I think the next like biggest factor towards your ad like optimization, it's actually just Facebook in general. Even if you're not on Facebook, because what happens on Facebook is if you don't have an account on Facebook, you still have an account on Facebook. And the reason you have an account on Facebook, even if you don't make one, is Facebook keeps track of when your relatives or friends mention like your name specifically. So if someone says, I'm gonna like I'm just like hanging out with like my friend, like whatever his name is, Facebook will recognize that name as a name that's not in its like database for like, because it will search that as a friend of their Facebook, and if it doesn't detect an account for that name that came up in that like post, it will make a new account which only has that name on it. And then whenever that name is mentioned with like any amount of like, you know, details, like oh, my friend likes this hobby, like it will pick up on the fact that they said that, and it will add that data to that fake like Facebook account that it auto-generated. And then once like the fake account gets like enough detail on it, it will then recognize when, if you have like a Google account, for example, it will recognize that that's actually you. It'll figure that out, and then anything that Facebook like data has, it will combine it with any Google data, and that will be like the biggest contributing factor to like the ads being targeted to you. Which, and then I think the third most important thing for like how your ads are targeted, it's just what you click on for ads. So like if an ad like grabs your interest and you decide to click on it to like see if it's like actually like something that's legit or whatever, then that's like the third most important thing for like influencing your ads. Because if you click on something, even if you don't like, you know, buy into it or interested in it, all your future ads are going to be skewed towards whatever it was you clicked on. And that's like the three factors, like the three most big factors I think that contribute to like your targeted ads. So it's like just Google, Facebook, and then what you click on and don't click on. Because what you don't click on also contributes a lot. Because if you don't click on an ad, it's like it knows that you didn't click on it, and it will try to not show you those type of ads. Unless it's still, unless like the, you know, beginning two factors, which is like it trying to give you ads based on what it knows about you. So you still might see similar ads even if you don't click on them, because it's betting that eventually you're gonna click on it, just because it's coinciding with what it knows about you. So it's just it's kind of like knows, it's like to an extent that it's a time game. It's like it knows that if it keeps showing you ads that relate to what your hobby is, that you're gonna bite eventually. Because it will mix in a few, like, you know, ads every now and then that just happen to be the lowest, like, price for that time slot. Like, that still will happen. And it will still try to do that just so that, like, if you're not biting with any ads that it thinks that you will want, that it can maybe discover something new about you. And, like, and this makes it sound like it's, like, a really smart system. It's really not that smart. It's just automated algorithms that were optimized to, like, work. So it's like, someone like put in all the research to figure this out like one time, and then that was all the work that was required, and now that's just how it is. Because essentially it's like 5 years ago, Google did the research on how to do, you know, web advertisement. Well, not even 5, probably more like 10 to 15 years ago. They put in the research to figure out how to optimize that ad system, and then they did all that, and then ever since then, they've never needed to do anything else. Like, they did it. Like, they solved the problem. It's just a one-time problem to solve. It's like, how do you make the best automated system to sell ads? It's like, well, that's how you do it. So you just make it show stuff that is relevant to like what you know about them, and you spitball in, you know, random ads every now and then just because they end up being really cheap, just so that you have a good chance of them just spontaneously clicking on it. And if they do spontaneously click on it, then you've learned even more information about them. You learn that maybe they have a passing interest in this because they clicked on it. So you're gonna try and show them related ads to whatever it was they did click on when they weren't biting on the ads that you thought that were going to be interesting to them. Stuffing like that, so. Yeah. That's why I don't like advertising. That's like the few times I was like involved in advertising, I just always ended up getting burned out really, really fast because it's like, I just don't like it. It just feels wrong. It's like it's just like a lot of it just feels like you're just taking advantage of people, and you're getting money from people by taking advantage of them rather than like actually convincing them intelligently that something's actually good. It feels like you're just tricking people into thinking something's good when it might not be to their best interest. You're just making them think it's their best interest, when in reality it's really not. But it's like, yeah, that's kind of like why when the few times I was trying to like get into advertisement, it's just like a career option. I just every single time I would fail, and like having long-term interest in it just because like it just didn't feel good. It's like I'd rather work like some part-time day job. Because at least then it's like, at least I'm just doing work at that point. I'm just doing simple work for a little bit of money, and that's kind of all I really want. Because it's like, yeah, well, it would be nice to earn like a really big salary doing like basically no work. I just can't live with myself if it was no work through advertising. It's like, I'd rather like earn way less money and actually feel like at least somewhat, you know, passionate about the work I do than to just do something that purely exists to earn money and I don't actually like doing it, and I don't like morally doing it either. It's like not only do I not enjoy doing it as like an activity, I don't even agree with it on my principles. It's like I just feel like I would rather earn less money doing something that I agree with morally and I find more enjoyable to actually do. Which is why I'm delivering this pizza part-time right now. Because it's like, yeah, that's like, it earns enough money at the moment, and I enjoy doing it, and then I could just save up money and, like, do something, go back to school and not have to pay up debts, because I can just pay my schooling in full if I ever decide to, like, do a more high-paying job or something. It's like, well, I'll have that option open up to me. Instead of, like, where if I want to do that, I have to go in debt for it, which is like, I'm not comfortable going in debt for something that I might not even commit to. It's like, I'd rather wait until I have the money to pay it off, and then I might consider doing any kind of schooling, if I could just pay for it out of pocket. That's like kind of where. Anyway, I'll just end this round of FFA. I think I had like a decent time just like shooting AI from like a decent, more far than I have been for the last few weeks, just to like get more practice for flying more passively. Because like I said, I've gotten tired of trying to be aggressive on people who are just permanently freaking aggressive on you, and it just gets so... It's just getting so exhausting to the point of making me feel ill. So it's like, I'm done. Yeah, I think the next time on Wednesday, I'll probably do the same thing again. I'll just do the empty map, just to... Because a friend said that he thought the empty map might have been making me sick just because there's not a lot of points of reference. It's like, I don't necessarily agree with that, but... I don't think it probably doesn't help you a lot. But it's like, whatever. Alright, goodbye.